The evening air carried a crisp chill as Maria Sokolov hurried down Fifth Avenue, her worn leather shoes clicking against the sidewalk. She was running late for her shift at the Crimson, and Mr. Peterson, the floor manager, had already warned her twice this month about tardiness. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not when her tuition savings were still so far from her goal. Maria ducked into a side alley, taking her usual shortcut behind the row of exclusive Manhattan restaurants and boutiques. The contrast always struck her. The gleaming front entrances where the wealthy arrived in limousines versus these back alleys where workers like her slipped in unnoticed. "Excuse me," she called, squeezing past two smoking chefs. Her Ukrainian accent still colored her words despite 5 years in America. She'd been told it was charming by some, but at the Crimson it often drew raised eyebrows from certain customers. The back door to the restaurant opened to a burst of steam and the clatter of dishes. The kitchen was already in full swing for the Friday night dinner service. Maria rushed to the staff-changing area, a converted storage room with metal lockers and a single mirror with a crack running through one corner. "Cutting it close," said Dina, an older waitress who had taken Maria under her wing when she'd started 8 months ago. Dina was fixing her graying hair into the tight bun required by the restaurant's strict appearance guidelines. "Bus broke down," Maria explained, quickly changing into her uniform. A crisp white blouse, black pencil skirt, and the signature crimson vest that gave the restaurant its name. The outfit was uncomfortably formal, but it was part of the high-end experience the Crimson sold to its customers, where dinners regularly cost more than what Maria earned in a day. "Peterson's in one of his moods," Dina whispered. "Table 7 sent back the Chateau Margaux, claiming it was corked." "It wasn't." Maria nodded gratefully for the warning as she pinned her name tag to her vest. She glanced at herself in the cracked mirror, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. At 26, she looked older than her years, her eyes carrying a weight that came from leaving behind a war-torn country and rebuilding a life from scratch. "You look fine," Dina assured her, misreading her moment of reflection. "Remember, shoulders back, smile on. These people pay for the whole show." The show was what the staff secretly called their performance each night. The Crimson wasn't just about food, it was theater for the wealthy. Every waiter and waitress had their role to play. Attentive but not familiar, present but nearly invisible, knowledgeable but never condescending to the customers who often knew less about wine and cuisine than they pretended to. Maria checked her phone one last time before tucking it away in her locker. There was a message from her mother back in Kiev, sending a photo of her younger brother's high school graduation, another milestone she'd missed. She swallowed the familiar ache of homesickness and closed the locker. "Maria, finally decided to join us?" Mr. Peterson appeared at the doorway, his thin face pinched with disapproval. His eyes darted to the wall clock. 3 minutes late. "I'll have to note it. Sorry, Mr. Peterson, the bus..." "Save it," he cut her off. "You've got Section 3 tonight. The Jung party is at Table 12. They're regulars, very good tippers if you stay on top of their drinks. Table 14 is a first-timer. Some tech executive showing off to friends. Handle with care." Maria nodded, mentally preparing for the evening ahead. Section 3 included the tables nearest to the restaurant's grand piano, a magnificent Steinway that was more decoration than instrument most nights. The restaurant occasionally hired pianists for special events, but the beautiful instrument sat silent more often than not. Every time she walked past it, Maria felt an almost physical pull toward its polished ebony surface. Before the war forced her family to flee Ukraine, she'd been studying at the Kiev Conservatory, her future bright with promise. Now that dream felt like it belonged to someone else, a ghost of a life she might have had. "And Maria," Mr. Peterson added, his voice dropping to a more serious tone, "we have several VIPs tonight. The owner's in and he's brought friends. No mistakes, understand?" "Yes, Mr. Peterson," she answered. The message was clear. Her job depended on perfect service tonight. The dining room of the Crimson lived up to its name. Deep red walls were adorned with original artwork, and crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in crisp white linens. Fresh flowers graced every table, and the gentle clink of fine china and crystal created a soothing backdrop to the hushed conversations of the diners. Maria moved through the space with practiced grace. Years of piano had given her good posture and fluid movements that served her well in navigating the tight spaces between tables. She greeted the Jung family with professional warmth, having served them several times before. Mrs. Zhang, a fashion designer, always remembered her name and asked how her night was going. A small kindness that stood out among the sea of customers who looked through her rather than at her. Your usual table, Mrs. Zhang. The chef mentioned he's prepared the duck specially tonight, knowing it's your favorite, Maria said, pulling out the chair for the elegant woman. How thoughtful. Thank you, Maria. How are your studies coming along? Mrs. Zhang asked as her husband helped their teenage daughter into her seat. The question caught Maria by surprise. Few customers remembered anything personal about the staff. Still saving, she admitted with a small smile. Maybe next semester? Mrs. Zhang nodded sympathetically. Keep at it. Education is worth every sacrifice. As Maria arranged their napkins and recited the evening's specials, she noticed a commotion at the entrance. The maitre d' was personally escorting a group of men to table 14 in her section. Even from a distance, Maria could tell these were important guests. The owner, Mr. Blackwell, was among them, something that rarely happened on regular nights. I'll bring your favorite Riesling right away, Maria told the Zhangs before heading to greet her new table. As she approached table 14, she could feel the energy shift. These men carried themselves with the easy confidence that came from wealth and power, the kind of people used to being catered to, their every whim satisfied without question. Good evening, gentlemen. Welcome to the Crimson, Maria said, distributing menus. My name is Maria, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Most of the men barely glanced up, already deep in conversation about market shares and investment opportunities. But one man, seated at the head of the table, looked directly at her. Something in his gaze made Maria instantly uncomfortable. It wasn't attraction or even curiosity. It was assessment, cold and calculating, as if he were appraising furniture rather than greeting a person. Richard Thornton, Mr. Blackwell said, gesturing to this man. This is one of our finest servers. You'll be well taken care of tonight. Richard Thornton. Maria recognized the name immediately. His tech company was constantly in the news, and his face occasionally appeared on business magazines that customers left behind. He was known as much for his brilliance as for his ruthlessness in business. We'll see about that, Thornton replied with a thin smile that didn't reach his eyes. I have very specific standards. Maria maintained her professional demeanor despite the chill his words sent down her spine. Our sommelier has prepared a special wine list for your table, Mr. Thornton. Would you like to hear about our reserve selections? What I'd like, Thornton said, leaning back in his chair, is for you to actually understand what you're serving. Can you tell me the difference between a Burgundy and a Bordeaux, without reading it off some memorized script? The question was clearly meant to embarrass her, asked loudly enough that nearby diners glanced over. Maria felt her cheeks warm but kept her composure. Burgundy wines are primarily made from Pinot Noir grapes, creating a lighter body with earthy notes, she answered evenly. Bordeaux uses mainly Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot, resulting in a fuller body and more tannic structure. Surprise flashed briefly across Thornton's face before his expression settled back into smug amusement. One of his companions looked impressed, but Thornton merely waved his hand dismissively. Memorize that well enough, he said. We'll have the 2010 Chateau Lafite Rothschild. I assume you know where to find it? Of course, sir. An excellent choice. Maria noted the order, knowing the bottle cost more than her monthly rent. She turned to leave when Thornton's voice stopped her. Oh, and honey, try not to butcher the pronunciation when you bring it. That accent of yours, Ukrainian, is it? It doesn't exactly scream fine dining. The comment stung, but Maria had developed thick skin over years of dealing with difficult customers. She simply nodded and walked away, her back straight, her expression neutral until she was safely behind the kitchen doors. There, she allowed herself a single deep breath before continuing with her duties. As she arranged the wine service for Thornton's table, she glanced through the kitchen doors. From this angle, she could see the grand piano sitting in its place of honor near the center of the restaurant. Its lid was closed tonight, the keys hidden away, silent. In another life, she would have been the one making music, bringing beauty into rooms like this. Instead, she was here, carrying trays and enduring casual cruelty from men who'd never had to wonder if they could afford both rent and groceries in the same month. She carefully placed the expensive wine on a silver tray, along with the proper glasses. The evening was just beginning, and Maria already knew it would be a long night. But like every other challenge she'd faced since coming to America, she would handle it with dignity and resilience. She had no choice. The dream of returning to music, of finishing what she'd started at the conservatory, depended on it. With one more deep breath, she pushed through the door back into the dining room, shoulders back, smile in place, ready to continue the show. The weight of the silver tray felt heavier than usual as Maria approached Thornton's table. She could feel eyes following her, not just from his party but from nearby diners who had overheard his earlier comments. The Crimson's hushed atmosphere seemed to amplify every step she took across the polished hardwood floor. "Your Chateau Lafite Rothschild." "Sir," Maria said, placing the wine table side with practiced precision. She presented the bottle to Thornton, label forward just as she'd been trained. Thornton barely glanced at it before giving a curt nod. "Let's see if you can open it properly." Maria began the ritual of wine service, cutting the foil below the lip of the bottle, wiping the top with a clean cloth, inserting the corkscrew with a steady hand. She could do this in her sleep by now, but tonight, with Thornton's cold eyes tracking her every move, each motion required extra concentration. The cork came out with a soft pop, and Maria placed it on the small silver dish without a word. She poured a small amount into Thornton's glass and waited. He swirled it lazily, making a show of examining the color against the white tablecloth before taking a deliberate sniff. His companions watched him expectantly, as if his verdict on the wine would reveal some profound truth. "Acceptable," he finally said, not looking at Maria. "You can pour." She moved around the table, serving each guest with the proper pour, careful not to drip. When she finished, Thornton spoke again, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "Tell me, where exactly are you from? That accent, it's quite distinctive." Maria knew this game. Some customers treated staff backgrounds like exotic entertainment. "Ukraine." "Sir?" she answered simply, tucking the bottle into the ice bucket. "Ah." Thornton nodded, as if confirming something to himself. "Rough situation over there. Though I suppose that explains why you're here serving wine instead of, what, farming potatoes?" One of his associates, a younger man with kind eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "Richard, come on," he murmured. But Thornton ignored him, his attention fixed on Maria. "What brought you to America? Besides the obvious economic advantages?" Maria maintained her professional smile. "Would you like to hear about our specials tonight? Chef has prepared an excellent Dover sole." "I asked you a question," Thornton pressed, his tone hardening slightly. Mr. Blackwell, the owner, who had been engaged in conversation with another guest at the table, now tuned in. His expression suggested mild concern, but not enough to intervene. Maria hesitated. Restaurant policy discouraged sharing personal information with customers, but directly refusing to answer could escalate the situation. "My family left during the conflict. I was studying music before that." "Music?" Thornton's eyebrows rose slightly. "What kind of music?" "Classical piano," she answered, hoping this would satisfy his curiosity so she could move on to taking their orders. "How quaint." Thornton smiled, but it was the smile of someone who had found a new target. "And now you're here, serving wine to people who actually achieved their dreams." He lifted his glass in a mock toast. The younger associate cleared his throat. "I'd love to hear about the specials," he said, trying to redirect the conversation. Maria gratefully began describing the night's offerings, but Thornton interrupted her halfway through. "Speak up. I can barely hear you over that accent." A tense silence fell over the table. Even in the Crimson, where staff endured all manner of entitled behavior, this crossed a line of basic decency. Maria felt heat rising to her cheeks but kept her voice steady as she continued with the specials. At the neighboring table, Mrs. Zhang caught Maria's eye and gave her a small, sympathetic smile. That tiny gesture of solidarity helped Maria maintain her composure. "I'll give you gentlemen a moment to decide," Maria said when she finished describing the menu. She turned to leave, but Thornton spoke again. "Not so fast. I have a question about the piano." He pointed to the grand Steinway that sat majestically in its corner. "Does anyone actually play that thing, or is it just for show like most things in this place?" "We have pianists for special events," Maria explained. "Saturday evenings and private parties? But not tonight?" Thornton asked. "No, sir. Not tonight." Thornton leaned back, swirling his wine. "Shame to let such a fine instrument sit unused. I played a bit in college." Probably still remember for Elise, the only piece everyone knows. He chuckled as if he'd said something clever. Maria nodded politely, though she knew for Elise was often butchered by beginners who understood nothing of Beethoven's intentions with the piece. "Do you play?" Thornton suddenly asked her. "You said you studied music." "I did, yes. But I should check on your bread." "Answer the question," Thornton insisted. "Do you play? Or was studying music just a fancy way of saying you took a few lessons as a child?" The restaurant seemed to quiet around them, nearby conversations dimming as people began to notice the exchange. Mr. Blackwell shifted in his seat but still said nothing, clearly unwilling to challenge a high-profile customer. "I played seriously for many years," Maria answered truthfully, wishing she could escape this conversation. Thornton's eyes lit up with an idea that made Maria instantly uneasy. "You know what would make this dinner interesting? Some live music." "Sir, I'm working. I'm not permitted to." "Mr. Blackwell," Thornton turned to the owner. "Wouldn't you agree that customer satisfaction is your highest priority?" Mr. Blackwell nodded cautiously. "Of course, Richard. The Crimson prides itself on exceptional service." "Then I'd like your waitress to play something for us." Thornton gestured toward the piano. "It would enhance our dining experience tremendously." Mr. Blackwell looked conflicted. "Richard, our staff have specific duties and Maria is one of our best servers. Perhaps I could arrange for a pianist tomorrow night if you'd like to return." "I'm not interested in tomorrow. I'm interested in now." Thornton's voice took on an edge that made it clear he was accustomed to getting his way. "Besides, I'm curious. She claims to be a serious musician." "I never claimed," Maria began. "It would be a shame," Thornton continued, talking over her, "to discover that your staff misrepresent themselves." The implication hung in the air. Maria realized with a sinking feeling that this had become about more than just a wealthy man's whim. Her job might now depend on humoring him. Mr. Blackwell cleared his throat. "Perhaps just one short piece wouldn't hurt, Maria. If you feel comfortable?" It wasn't really a question, and they both knew it. Maria had bills due next week and rent the week after. Her savings for school were still far too small to risk losing this job. "Of course," she said quietly. "Excellent." Thornton clapped his hands together. "This should be entertaining." Maria excused herself to hand off her tables to Dina, explaining the situation in hushed tones by the kitchen door. "That's ridiculous," Dina hissed. "Peterson won't like this." "Mr. Blackwell approved it," Maria said, though the words tasted bitter. "Just cover my section for a few minutes. I'll play something simple and be done with it." "That man is a piece of work," Dina muttered, glancing toward Thornton's table. "Don't let him rattle you." Maria nodded gratefully and made her way toward the piano. As she crossed the dining room, she became acutely aware of the attention focusing on her. Conversations paused, forks stilled above plates. Even the kitchen staff peered through the swinging doors, curious about the unusual break in routine. The Steinway waited like an old friend she hadn't seen in too long. Despite the circumstances, Maria felt a flutter of excitement at the prospect of touching those keys again. It had been months since she'd had a chance to play. Her tiny apartment couldn't accommodate even an upright piano, and practice rooms for rent were an expense she couldn't justify. She sat on the bench, adjusting it slightly, and took a breath. The restaurant had fallen completely silent now. She could sense Thornton watching, waiting for her to embarrass herself. For a moment, she considered playing something simple, a basic classical piece that would fulfill the obligation without revealing too much of herself. But then she saw the satisfied smirk on Thornton's face, so certain he had power over her, so sure she would provide the entertainment he expected from someone he viewed as beneath him. Something shifted inside her. If she was going to be forced to play, she would play on her terms. Maria lifted her hands, hovering them above the keys. Years of muscle memory awakened in her fingers. In this moment, she wasn't a waitress in a borrowed uniform serving those more fortunate. She was who she had always been, a musician whose life had been interrupted but not ended. She began with a gentle, almost tentative touch, the opening notes of Debussy's Clair de Lune floating into the hushed space. The piano responded beautifully, its tone warm and resonant. As she continued, her confidence grew. The piece was technically demanding but not flashy, a test of touch and expression rather than speed. The music filled the restaurant, transforming the atmosphere. Maria felt herself disappearing into the familiar landscape of the composition, her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget, how it felt to speak through music, to translate emotion into sound. When she finished the Debussy, there was a moment of complete silence before scattered applause broke out. She hadn't meant to play for applause, but the sound reminded her that she had an audience. She turned slightly on the bench and saw surprised faces at nearby tables. Mrs. Zhang was smiling warmly. Even some of the kitchen staff had emerged to listen. At Thornton's table, the reactions were mixed. The younger associate looked genuinely impressed. Mr. Blackwell seemed surprised but pleased at the unexpected entertainment. Only Thornton's expression remained calculating, his initial plan to embarrass her clearly not working out as he'd intended. Maria stood, planning to return to her duties, when Thornton's voice cut through the appreciative murmurs. "Well, that was adequate," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. A simple piece, of course. Anyone with basic training could manage it. The comment was designed to diminish what she'd done to put her back in her place. Maria felt a flash of anger, unfamiliar and hot. Normally, she would have accepted the insult silently, prioritizing her job security over her dignity. But something about sitting at the piano again, reconnecting with the person she used to be, made it impossible to retreat into practiced subservience. She turned to face Thornton directly. "Would you prefer something more technically demanding, sir?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nearby diners exchanged glances, sensing the tension. Mr. Blackwell looked nervous now, clearly wondering if he'd made a mistake in allowing this departure from routine. Thornton's eyes narrowed slightly, but his smile widened. "By all means. Impress me if you can." As Maria sat back down at the piano, she knew she was at a crossroads. The next piece she played might cost her this job, but it would remind her of who she really was, and show Richard Thornton that the people he so casually dismissed might contain depths he could never fathom. Her hands returned to the keys, and this time there was no hesitation. Maria's fingers hovered over the keys for just a moment as she made her choice. Then, with absolute conviction, she began to play Chopin's Ballad No. 1 in G minor. The opening notes rang out, gentle, almost questioning, before building into the storm that made this piece famous among pianists. It was a composition that told a story, beginning with uncertainty before unleashing technical passages that required years of training to master. As she played, Maria felt the restaurant dissolve around her. The white noise of judgmental stares, the weight of her uniform, the ache in her feet from hours of standing, all of it faded as her muscle memory took over. Her hands remembered what her conscious mind had tried to forget during long months of survival mode. The piece progressed into its challenging middle section, where rapid runs and complex harmonies demanded complete focus. Maria's fingers flew across the keys with precision, born from thousands of hours of practice. This wasn't just showing off technique. This was speaking through music, expressing the turbulent emotion she normally kept carefully contained. Through half-closed eyes, she caught glimpses of the restaurant. Diners had stopped eating, forks suspended midair. Kitchen staff lined the back wall. Mr. Peterson stood frozen by the bar, a tray of drinks forgotten in his hands. At Thornton's table, the expressions told their own story. The younger associate's mouth had fallen slightly open in genuine surprise. Mr. Blackwell looked as though he was seeing one of his staff members for the first time. And Thornton, his face had lost its smug certainty, replaced by something Maria couldn't quite identify. She approached the climax of the piece, where Chopin demanded everything a pianist could give: speed, power, delicacy, and raw emotion all at once. Maria's body swayed slightly with the effort, completely surrendered to the music. This wasn't the careful, restrained movements of a waitress trying to be invisible. This was an artist in her element, holding nothing back. As she played the final descending runs and powerful chords, she felt something unlock inside her, a door she had closed when her family fled Ukraine, when she had packed away her dreams along with the few possessions they could carry. For these few minutes she was wholly herself again. The final notes resonated through the room, and then silence. Complete stunned silence. Maria's hands came to rest in her lap. She took a breath and looked up, suddenly aware again of where she was and what had just happened. The silence stretched for 3, 4, 5 seconds. Then the applause began. It started with Mrs. Zhang, who stood from her table, clapping with genuine enthusiasm. Others joined quickly, first a few, then nearly everyone in the restaurant. Even the kitchen staff were applauding, their usually professional reserve forgotten. Maria stood from the bench, her legs slightly unsteady. She hadn't played like that in years. She hadn't been herself like that in years. "Brava," called an older gentleman from across the room. "Magnificent. Where did you study?" asked a woman in an evening gown. "Kiev Conservatory," Maria answered quietly, unused to being the center of attention in this way. Mr. Peterson had recovered enough to set down his tray and approach her. Maria braced herself for a reprimand about abandoning her duties, but instead he just shook his head in amazement. "I had no idea," he said, his usual stern expression replaced by something like respect. Maria's eyes found Thornton's table. The men there sat motionless, not joining the applause. Thornton himself looked as if someone had struck him. The confident, mocking smile was gone, replaced by an expression she recognized immediately. It was the face of someone who had severely miscalculated. "I should return to my duties," Maria said to Mr. Peterson, suddenly uncomfortable with all the attention. Of course, he nodded, but his tone had changed completely. "Take your time." As she made her way back toward Thornton's table, customers reached out to touch her arm, offering compliments and questions. Maria smiled and thanked them politely but kept moving. She was still on the clock, still needed this job. When she reached Thornton's table, she straightened her vest and adopted her professional tone. "Have you decided on your orders, gentlemen?" The younger associate recovered first. "That was extraordinary. Truly extraordinary." "Thank you, sir," Maria replied, her order pad ready. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Another man at the table asked. "I studied at the conservatory from age 7, Maria explained briefly. "Now about your dinner selection, 7? The man repeated. "You must have been some kind of prodigy," Maria shrugged slightly. "Many children in Ukraine start young. It's not so unusual." Throughout this exchange, Thornton remained silent, his eyes fixed on Maria with an intensity that made her uneasy. It wasn't the dismissive look from earlier. Now he was studying her as if trying to solve a puzzle. "I'll have the Dover sole," the younger associate said, clearly trying to help Maria return to her job. She nodded gratefully and took the rest of their orders. Only when she reached Thornton did she pause, pen hovering above her pad. "And for you, sir?" Thornton seemed to come back to himself. "The Wagyu ribeye, rare." His voice had lost its mocking edge, but Maria could sense he wasn't finished with her. She nodded and collected the menus. "I'll put these orders in right away." As she turned to leave, Thornton spoke again. "Wait," Maria paused, bracing herself. "That piece. Chopin's First Ballad. It's considered one of the most technically demanding pieces in the piano repertoire." It wasn't a question, but Maria answered anyway. "Yes, sir." "You played it flawlessly." Again, not a question. Maria wasn't sure how to respond. "May I ask why someone with your obvious talent is serving overpriced wine to people like me?" His tone wasn't sneering now. There was genuine curiosity in it. Maria felt the eyes of the entire table on her. She didn't want to share her story with these men, but something in Thornton's question suggested he might actually listen this time. "War doesn't care about talent, Mr. Thornton," she said quietly. "My family left everything behind. I work here to help support them and save for school." She paused, then added, "Would there be anything else?" The younger associate cleared his throat. "Actually, I think we could use another bottle of wine." Maria nodded and left to place their food orders, feeling Thornton's eyes following her across the dining room. In the kitchen, she was met with surprised looks and questions from the staff who had witnessed her performance. "Why didn't you tell us you could play like that?" asked Carlos, one of the line cooks. "It never came up," Maria answered simply, placing the order tickets on the rail. "Never came up?" Carlos laughed. "You're a world-class pianist. That's not something you just forget to mention." Maria shrugged. "Here, I'm just a waitress." "Not anymore, you're not," said Dina, approaching with an empty tray. "The whole restaurant is buzzing about you. Mr. Blackwell can't stop telling people you're his employee like he discovered you or something." "Great," Maria sighed. "Just what I need, more attention from management." "No, you don't understand," Dina lowered her voice. "This could be good for you. Really good." Before Maria could ask what she meant, Mr. Peterson appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Maria, a word please," her stomach tightened. Despite the applause, despite the apparent appreciation, Years of experience had taught her that standing out was risky, especially when you were already an immigrant with an accent in a job where blending in was part of the expectation. She followed Mr. Peterson to the small office near the staff room, expecting to be reprimanded for disrupting service or reminded about the restaurant's policies on staff-customer interactions. Instead, he closed the door and turned to her with an expression she'd never seen on his face. Before, something almost like embarrassment. "Mr. Blackwell would like you to join him at table 14 when you have a moment," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "Is there a problem with their order?" Maria asked. No problem." Peterson shook his head. "He just wants to speak with you." Maria nodded, though uncertainty coursed through her. "I'll go once I've delivered their appetizers." Back on the floor, she noticed the atmosphere had changed. Customers who had never looked at her twice now watched as she moved through the dining room. Some smiled or nodded in recognition. A woman stopped her to ask if she played professionally. When she brought the appetizers to Thornton's table, the conversation paused as she approached. The men watched her arrange the plates with new interest. "Mr. Blackwell mentioned you'd like to speak with me," she said when she'd finished. Blackwell nodded, suddenly looking somewhat nervous himself. "Yes, Maria. Mr. Thornton has a proposal for you." Maria turned to Thornton, wariness evident in her posture. His earlier mockery was still fresh in her mind. Thornton set down his fork and regarded her thoughtfully. The condescension was gone from his face, replaced by something that looked almost like respect, though Maria wasn't quite ready to trust it. "That performance changed the entire atmosphere of this restaurant," he said. "I've heard professionals at Carnegie Hall who couldn't bring that piece to life the way you just did." Maria waited, unsure where this was going. "I made an assumption about you," Thornton continued. "A wrong one. I do that sometimes, make quick judgments about people." It wasn't quite an apology, but the admission seemed to cost him something in front of his associates. "Thank you for acknowledging that, sir," Maria said carefully. "Was there something else?" Thornton reached into his jacket and pulled out a checkbook. "I believe in rewarding exceptional talent when I encounter it, especially when I've underestimated it." He began writing. Maria felt a flash of indignation. Did he think he could simply throw money at the situation to absolve himself? Buy her off after humiliating her? "That's not necessary," she began, but Thornton held up his hand. "It's not charity," he said firmly. "It's recognition, and perhaps a small reparation for my behavior earlier." He tore the check from the book and held it out to her. Maria didn't move to take it. "What are your plans?" Thornton asked when she didn't reach for the check. "Clearly you don't belong here carrying plates. You belong on a stage." The younger associate nodded in agreement. "Have you applied to continue your studies here?" "Juilliard, Manhattan School of Music?" "I've been saving," Maria said simply. "But international student tuition is challenging." Thornton was still holding out the check. "Consider this an investment, then, in your future." Maria finally took the check, planning to glance at it quickly and tuck it away. But when she saw the amount written on it, her eyes widened involuntarily. $10,000. More money than she'd managed to save in over a year of double shifts and strict budgeting. Maria stared at the check, unable to fully process what she was seeing. $10,000. The amount seemed impossible, almost a year's worth of rent for her small apartment. Her first instinct was to hand it back. Taking money from Thornton felt wrong somehow, like accepting payment for her humiliation. "I can't accept this," she said, extending her hand to return the check. Thornton didn't take it back. "Yes, you can. And you will." "You don't need to pay me for playing the piano," Maria insisted, her voice low to avoid drawing more attention. "I'm not paying you for playing. I'm investing in talent that shouldn't be wasted serving wine." Thornton's voice had lost all its earlier mockery. "Consider it a scholarship. No strings attached." The younger associate nodded encouragingly. "You should take it, you know. Richard doesn't part with money easily, but he respects excellence when he sees it." Maria looked at the check again, her mind racing. With this money, she could apply for the spring semester at Juilliard or Manhattan School of Music. She could cut back on some shifts and have time to practice again. She could send money home to help her brother with his studies. But pride and suspicion still made her hesitate. "Why are you doing this?" Thornton considered her question seriously. "Let's say I'm correcting an error in judgment. I assumed certain things about you based on your job and your accent. I was wrong. He paused, then added, I've built a career making better investments than my competitors. This is one of them. Mr. Blackwell, who had been watching this exchange with great interest, cleared his throat. Maria, there's something else we'd like to discuss with you. She turned to her employer, suddenly remembering that she was still on the clock, still in her uniform, still responsible for serving these men and her other tables. This surreal interlude had momentarily made her forget her place. I've been thinking, Blackwell continued. We've been looking for ways to enhance the dining experience here at the Crimson. That piano sits unused most nights. What would you think about playing regularly? Weekend evenings, perhaps? We could work out a proper arrangement, much better compensation than server wages, of course. Maria blinked in surprise. You want me to play here? As a pianist, not a waitress? As both, if you like, Blackwell said quickly, clearly concerned about losing a good server. Or just as our house pianist, if you prefer. 2 nights a week to start? We'd feature you in our marketing materials. The Crimson Presents Maria Sokolov has a nice ring to it, don't you think? The offer was unexpected. Playing professionally again, even in a restaurant rather than a concert hall, was something she'd stopped allowing herself to hope for. I'd need to practice, she said, thinking practically. I haven't played regularly in a long time. We could arrange for you to use the piano during off hours, Blackwell suggested eagerly. Before we open for lunch, perhaps? Maria nodded slowly, still processing this sudden turn of events. Just an hour ago, she'd been just another invisible server in a high-end restaurant. Now she held a check for $10,000 and was being offered a position as a featured performer. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Blackwell agreed. But don't think too long. I'd like to announce it this weekend if possible. Just then, Dina appeared tableside. Maria, your other tables, she reminded gently. Yes, I should get back to work, Maria said, carefully folding the check and placing it in her vest pocket. Thank you, Mr. Thornton. I'll bring your main courses as soon as they're ready. As she walked away, she heard the men at the table resume their conversation, but now with a different energy than before. She caught snippets, remarkable talent and conservatory training replacing the earlier dismissive comments. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Maria went through the motions of service, delivering food, refilling glasses, clearing plates, but her mind was elsewhere, alternating between disbelief at what had happened and cautious planning for what might come next. Her other customers treated her differently now. Those who had witnessed her performance asked questions about her background, her training, her future plans. For the first time since coming to America, people seemed to see beyond her accent and uniform to the person underneath. When she delivered dessert to Thornton's table, the atmosphere had changed completely. The men were relaxed, their business discussions apparently concluded successfully. Maria, Thornton said as she arranged the plates, I have a friend who serves on the board at Manhattan School of Music. If you're applying there, I'd be happy to put in a word. That's very kind, she replied, surprised at his continued interest. I'll let you know. The younger associate smiled at her. I hope we get to hear you play again sometime. Apparently you will if you dine here on weekends, she said, with a small smile of her own. As the evening wound down and Thornton's party prepared to leave, Maria brought their check. Thornton handed her his credit card without looking at the bill. I trust everything is in order, he said. Maria ran the card and returned with the receipt for his signature. As she waited, he fixed her with a serious look. That check I gave you, I meant what I said. No strings attached. Use it for school, for rent, to bring family over, whatever you need. But don't waste your gift. The world has enough waitresses, but too few artists. Thank you, Maria said simply. I won't waste it. Thornton nodded, seemingly satisfied. He added a substantial tip to the already expensive meal and signed the receipt with a flourish. After Thornton's party left, the restaurant gradually emptied. As Maria cleaned her section, she found herself glancing repeatedly at the piano. In the dimmed evening lighting, it seemed to be calling to her. Mr. Peterson approached as she wiped down her last table. Mr. Blackwell would like to see you in his office before you leave. Maria nodded, a flutter of anxiety returning. Despite the seemingly positive turn of events, years of struggle had taught her to be cautious. Offers that seemed too good to be true usually were. She knocked on Blackwell's office door, still in her uniform but with her purse slung over her shoulder, ready to head home. Come in. Come in, Blackwell called. He was sitting behind his desk looking over some paperwork. When she entered, he set it aside and gestured for her to sit. Remarkable evening, he said, leaning back in his chair. I've been running this restaurant for 15 years, and I've never seen anything quite like it. I'm sorry if I disrupted service, Maria said automatically. Blackwell waved this away. Quite the opposite. After your performance, our bar sales increased 30%. Everyone stayed for an extra drink, hoping you might play again. He smiled. That's good business. Maria remained quiet, waiting for him to continue. I was serious about my offer, Blackwell said. House pianist Friday and Saturday evenings, 3 hours of playing with appropriate breaks. We'd start you at triple your current hourly wage. Maria's eyes widened slightly. Triple her current wage would allow her to work fewer shifts while actually earning more. You're that confident people would come specifically to hear me play? She asked. Absolutely. Blackwell nodded firmly. But more than that, I think it's the right thing to do. You clearly have a rare talent. I'd like to give you a platform for it. He paused, then added with a businessman's practicality, and yes, I believe it will be very good for business. Could I keep some serving shifts? Maria asked. At least for now. If you want to, certainly. Blackwell looked surprised at the request. I'd like to, she decided. Just a few each week. I have regulars who depend on me. In truth, it wasn't just about her customers. Despite the excitement of potentially returning to music, Maria wasn't ready to fully let go of the stability her serving job provided. Dreams had failed her before. We can arrange that, Blackwell agreed. Take the weekend to think about the details. We can discuss a formal arrangement on Monday. Maria nodded and stood to leave. Oh, and Maria, Blackwell added, that was truly beautiful playing tonight. Wherever your path leads, I hope you keep music in your life. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Thank you, sir. I think I will. As she left the restaurant that night, the city felt different somehow. The same crowded streets, the same subway station, the same late-night food vendors, but Maria moved through it all with a new awareness. The weight of Thornton's check in her purse and Blackwell's offer in her mind had shifted something fundamental in how she saw herself and her future. On the subway ride home, she found herself making mental lists. She would need to create a practice schedule, find sheet music, her old scores were still in Ukraine, research application deadlines for music schools. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't just surviving, but thriving, one where her music mattered. When she finally reached her small apartment in Queens, she was exhausted but too wired to sleep. Her roommate, a nursing student who worked night shifts, was already gone, leaving the tiny shared space quiet and empty. Maria hung up her uniform and changed into comfortable clothes. She sat on the edge of her bed and finally took out Thornton's check again, looking at it under the yellow light of her bedside lamp. $10,000. A life-changing sum for someone in her position. She reached for her phone and checked the time in Ukraine. Early morning there, her mother would be awake. She dialed the familiar number, suddenly eager to share her news. Mama? It's me. Something incredible happened today. I played again. As she spoke, Maria's free hand moved unconsciously through the air, fingers tracing the patterns of Chopin's notes on an invisible keyboard. After years of forced silence, the music inside her had found its voice again. 3 months later, Maria adjusted the sleeves of her new black dress as she sat before the gleaming Steinway at the Crimson. Friday night, and the restaurant was packed. Reservations now booked weeks in advance for tables during her performance hours. The transition hadn't been seamless. The first few weekends, she'd battled nerves that she'd never experienced during her conservatory days. Playing for diners was different from playing for professors or even in recitals. People talked, silverware clinked, waiters moved about. But gradually, she'd adapted, finding a rhythm that worked both for her artistry and for the restaurant's atmosphere. Tonight was special, though. Tonight would be her last regular performance at the Crimson. She glanced toward the entrance, where Mr. Peterson was escorting a party to their table, Thornton and his associates, including the younger man from that first night. They'd become regular visitors over the past months, usually arriving just before her performance began. Thornton always requested the same table, close enough to see her hands move across the keys, but not so close as to be intrusive. Maria nodded in their direction, a small acknowledgement that would have been unthinkable during her waitressing days. So much had changed since that night when Thornton had tried to humiliate her, and instead had accidentally launched her back toward her true path. She positioned her hands above the keys and began to play. Her opening piece was always Debussy's Clair de Lune now, a nod to that first night, and a gentle way to settle the diners into her musical world before moving to more complex pieces. As she played, her mind drifted back over the whirlwind of the past 3 months. The Monday after Thornton's visit, she'd signed a formal agreement with Blackwell to become the Crimson's weekend pianist. True to his word, he'd featured her prominently in the restaurant's marketing. Experience the extraordinary talent of Maria Sokolov appeared on their website and in local advertising. With Thornton's check, she'd done several things at once: sent money to her family in Ukraine, paid off the small debt she'd accumulated since arriving in America, and applied to 3 music schools for the spring semester. To her surprise and delight, all 3 had accepted her. More surprising still had been the email from the admissions office at Manhattan School of Music, mentioning that board member Richard Thornton had spoken highly of her talent. True to his word, he had made that call. She'd chosen Juilliard in the end, drawn by a professor there whose approach to Chopin had always resonated with her. The school had even offered her a partial scholarship after her audition, playing the very ballade that had changed her fate at the Crimson. Maria transitioned from Debussy into a Schubert impromptu, her fingers finding the delicate balance between technical precision and emotional expression. Around her, the restaurant hummed with life. She caught glimpses of Dina serving a nearby table, of Mr. Peterson supervising the floor, of Mrs. Zhang and her family at their usual Friday table. What amazed her most about these past months was how quickly people adapted to seeing her differently. The same customers who had once barely noticed her as she refilled their water glasses now stopped to chat about her music. Staff who had known her only as a fellow server now asked for her autograph to give to friends. Mr. Peterson, who had once scolded her for being 3 minutes late, now introduced her to VIP guests with evident pride. Only Maria herself sometimes struggled to reconcile her 2 worlds. She still worked 2 lunch shifts per week as a server, partly for the extra income but mostly to keep herself grounded. It was during those shifts, dressed in the same uniform as everyone else, that she remembered most clearly who she was and where she had come from. The Schubert piece came to an end, and Maria paused, acknowledging the applause with a small nod, before beginning a Rachmaninoff prelude. This was another change. She was learning to accept recognition gracefully, something her conservatory training had never quite prepared her for. As her fingers worked through Rachmaninoff's complex harmonies, she spotted a new face at the bar, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in an elegant twist. She wasn't eating, just sipping a glass of wine and watching Maria with intense focus. There was something familiar about her posture, the way she held her head, but Maria couldn't place her. After finishing the Rachmaninoff, Maria stood for her customary short break. As she made her way toward the back hallway that led to the staff area, the woman from the bar intercepted her. "Ms. Sokolov?" she said, extending her hand. "My name is Nadia Petrov. I teach at Juilliard." Maria's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Professor Petrov, I'm enrolled in your romantic period performance class next semester." The older woman smiled. "I know. I recognized your name from the admissions list. When a colleague mentioned a Ukrainian pianist playing at the Crimson who had hands like Argerich and soul like Rubinstein, I had to come see for myself." She paused, her dark eyes appraising Maria. He wasn't exaggerating. Maria felt herself blush slightly. "Thank you. That's very kind." "Not kind, accurate." Professor Petrov's tone was matter-of-fact. "You've had excellent training." "Kiev Conservatory?" "Yes, before the war. I studied with Professor Borovsky." "Ah, Alexander. We were at Moscow Conservatory together years ago." "Brilliant teacher." Maria nodded, a sudden lump in her throat at the mention of her former mentor. "He was very patient with me." "Patient? With talent like yours? I doubt patience was required." Professor Petrov glanced toward the piano. "But I won't keep you from your performance. I just wanted to introduce myself and say that I'm looking forward to working with you next semester." She hesitated, then added, "And to let you know that there might be an opportunity for you sooner than that." "What kind of opportunity?" Maria asked. "The school's winter showcase." One of our planned performers has withdrawn due to illness. We're looking for a replacement. After hearing you tonight, I'd like to recommend you." Maria stared at her in surprise. "But I'm not even a student yet." "You will be in January. The showcase is in December." "Close enough." Professor Petrov shrugged. "Think about it. It would be a good introduction to the Juilliard community." Yes, of course. Thank you." Maria nodded, still processing the unexpected offer. "Excellent. We'll talk details later." The professor smiled. "Now go finish enchanting your audience." As Maria returned to the piano for the second half of her performance, she caught Thornton watching her with interest. Clearly curious about her conversation with Professor Petrov, she gave him a small smile before sitting down again. For her final piece of the night, she had prepared something special. She took a deep breath and began to play, not Chopin or Liszt or any of the other composers whose work had filled her program these past months. Instead, her fingers found the opening notes of a Ukrainian folk melody, one her grandmother had sung to her as a child. It was a simple tune, but Maria embellished it with her own harmonies and variations, transforming the folk song into something that honored its origins while creating something new. As she played, she thought of home, both the home she had left behind and the new one she was creating here, note by note. When she finished, the restaurant was completely silent for a long moment before the applause began. She stood and bowed, her eyes sweeping across the room, from Thornton's table to the kitchen door where several staff members had gathered to listen, to Professor Petrov at the bar. Mr. Blackwell approached as the applause died down, a bouquet of flowers in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the room, "as many of you know, tonight marks Maria Sokolov's final regular performance at the Crimson. As she prepares to begin her studies at Juilliard in January." He handed her the flowers. "Maria, you have brought something truly special to our restaurant these past months. You'll always have a home here." The room applauded again, and Maria found herself unexpectedly moved by the genuine warmth in Blackwell's words. "Thank you," she said simply. "The Crimson gave me back my music when I thought it was lost. I won't forget that." As the evening wound down and customers began to leave, Maria found herself approached by dozens of well-wishers. Regular patrons who had come every weekend to hear her play, fellow staff members who slipped her cards with good luck messages, even Mr. Peterson, who gruffly told her not to forget the little people when she became famous. Finally, as the restaurant emptied, only Thornton remained at his table, nursing a glass of whiskey. Maria walked over to him, still holding her bouquet. "Mr. Thornton," she acknowledged. "Ms. Sokolov," he replied with equal formality before a small smile broke through. "I saw you speaking with Nadia Petrov earlier. She doesn't impress easily. You know her?" Maria asked, surprised. "I've served on boards with her at various arts organizations. Brilliant musician, terrifying critic." He studied Maria's face. "What did she want?" "To offer me a spot in the winter showcase at Juilliard." Thornton nodded, clearly impressed. "That's quite an honor for someone not yet enrolled." "You'll accept, of course." "I think so, yes." He took a sip of his whiskey. "Do you know why I came back here weekend after weekend?" Maria tilted her head slightly. "To hear the music?" "Partly," he set down his glass. "Mostly to remind myself that I was wrong about you. It's not a lesson I learn often enough." He stood and extended his hand. "Congratulations on Juilliard, Maria. I look forward to attending your first concert there." She shook his hand. "Thank you for your investment, Mr. Thornton. I hope it's paying returns." "The best kind," he replied with unexpected sincerity. "It reminded me to look beyond the surface. That's a lesson worth far more than $10,000. After Thornton left, Maria lingered at the piano, running her fingers lightly over the keys that had become so familiar these past months. Tomorrow she would be back in her waitress uniform for her final lunch shift. Next week she would begin intensive preparation for the winter showcase. In January she would walk through the doors of Juilliard as a student. But tonight, in the quiet of the nearly empty restaurant, she simply played, a soft, thoughtful improvisation that spoke of endings and beginnings, of journeys interrupted and resumed, of music that couldn't be silenced even by war and displacement. She played for herself, for the path behind and the one ahead, for everyone who had ever been underestimated or overlooked. And somewhere in the gentle notes that filled the dimly lit restaurant, Maria Sokolov found herself exactly where she was meant to be.